Well, happy Monday, everyone. Hope that the weekend was good. A lot of NFL, college games to watch. It was a good weekend for football. I know, Mike, we have 2 more weeks, less than 2 weeks, till we talk about Arkansas football, but I'm sure a lot of people asking about Arkansas football in your Ask Mike today.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So let's start like we always do with the weekly COVID update.
Yeah, I feel like a broken record because I always say there's bad news and good news, and we always start off with the bad news. And the bad news is we have had teams that have had to postpone games, not cancel games. That's the way they're handling this so far. They don't feel like they have enough players, and in some cases there's protocols. Then they have postponed a game to a later date. If they have an open date, they'll postpone it to that. If not, it's at the end of the season or whatever. Now, there's not anywhere close to the majority of the teams doing this. There's been a few teams that have had to do this. But I think 2 particular cases are really interesting. One of them is Arkansas State, because they had 9 starters. They were missing 9 starters. Most teams, most coaches would have just dropped back and punt if you have that situation. Especially you're a mid-major conference and you're going to go play Kansas State out of the Big 12. They just went up there and won. More power to them. I like that. I like the way you approach that, because look, people have said there really have been 2 kinds of people all along with this COVID thing, all summer, all during this build-up period. There have been those people that sat over here on the internet and said, nope, 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 can't play, not going to play, not going to happen. And then there are people behind the scenes in these various conferences, athletic directors on teams, coaches, athletes that have had to work, and they started early trying to figure out a way to make this happen. And they all came up with plans. That's the plan with the SEC, is move the season back, allow for the fact that we're going to have students come on campus, probably going to cause some problems, and we're going to have 2 or 3 weeks to deal with that, which we've seen that happen. So they've had a plan all along. And this is why we've gotten now 3 weeks into the college football season. Now, do you still have people standing out there going, not going to happen? Yeah, I read it all the time. And maybe something will happen, but it looks better and better to me all the time because of this, what we're talking about. They faced a problem. They solved the problem. They didn't drop back and punt. They just said, hey, we're going to play anyway, and they played and they won. Oklahoma they had an outbreak. Now, Oklahoma is like Arkansas. There are a bunch of schools that aren't releasing numbers. They're not telling you, we had 6 players, we did this. And nobody is giving names. You're not going to get names of anybody.
That's a HIPAA law.
That's a HIPAA law. But some schools have chosen not to release numbers of cases. Other schools have. Oklahoma didn't say how many they had. They just said they had a problem. But they went ahead and played, and they won in a blowout over Bobby Petrino and Missouri State. So, again, I consider all of that good news.
Sure.
And then there's more good news because it's looking more and more like the Big Ten is now going to start playing by sometime in October, which would be much better than pushing it all the way back into, I don't know, January or whatever they were going to do. Now, there's still not we thought there might be a vote on that today. It looks like it's going to be delayed. And Dan Patrick was saying over the weekend that he had heard that even if they took a vote, that Michigan and Maryland would still vote not to play. Apparently they've got people in their administration there that are just bound and determined we can't play football. So would the Big Ten proceed with 2 of its member institutions saying we're not playing? Yeah, I think they would.
To continue on this, did you see Auburn's news today? They have 10 more guys out.
Yes.
So that happened today. They released that they have 10 more guys out. They didn't say how many vote. I think 2 might have tested positive, and then they had to quarantine the rest. But it sounds like Auburn, this is the 2nd time that they've had to deal with something.
Yeah, it does sound, and look, I've talked about this too.
And again, we need to clarify something really fast. Auburn is one of those schools who's being transparent with the media. We have absolutely no idea what's happening with Arkansas because they're not releasing those numbers. So just because it's happening at Auburn doesn't mean it's not happening at Arkansas or other SEC schools. They just aren't reporting it.
Pretty sure it's not happening in numbers at Arkansas, and I'll tell you why. Because they've been open. They've let us come into practice and watch. And even though we've kind of been told don't go in there with a list and start trying to figure out who's not here because we don't want you doing that, you can go in there and look, and if certain players were missing, you would know it. And we haven't had a situation where you could look around and see a whole bunch of guys obviously gone.
Or a position group.
Right. So I don't think they have that problem. But the thing with Auburn, to me, when you continuously have a problem, you got something wrong going on there. And I've said this all along, too. COVID will impact the season in terms of wins and losses because there are going to be teams whose coaches and athletes deal with this more responsibly than others. And you may see teams lose football games this year because their teams aren't disciplined, they're not listening to their coaches. And to me, this is part of what happened with Memphis. Let's talk about Memphis, because they beat Arkansas State, and now looks like a really big win. And so what did they do? Their own school came out and said, they had traced these positive tests to social activities not associated with the team after the game. Now, I found it hilarious. One of their players popped up and said, no, and he was pointing the fingers. It was Arkansas State because, see, they had some guys that next week. They gave it to us. No, I'm sorry, that's a fail. You're testing everybody before games. Nobody gets on the field with a positive test. So they didn't get whatever they got at Memphis from Arkansas State. They got it from their own school, said how they got it. So again, some schools are disciplined, some schools aren't, and it's going to impact your win-loss record.
It's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out with Auburn because, again, we are now inside that 14-week period, and they start the season with Kentucky. Okay, our first question comes from Parallax Pig, who asks, what is the stated SEC protocol for positive cases on a team concerning if you will play a game? I have noticed that in the first 2 weeks, several teams have postponed or canceled games because of positive tests.
There are conferences that have protocols, not just as to how many athletes sitting out will cause you to cancel a game. In the ACC, for instance, they've got a minimum number of teams that can be playing any given weekend. If you go beyond that, everybody has to stop. And that's 8. They have to have at least 8 games being played every weekend. If it goes below 8, then nobody can play. The SEC doesn't have protocols like that. And as far as I know, they don't have any protocols on how each team handles whether they play or not. It's just up to the coach. And again, what we've seen is a lot of coaches have been creative and figured out a way to play. Knowing the SEC the way I do, and this will be interesting, we talked about Auburn. What are they going to do? How are they going to handle this? Are they going to cancel right off the bat? My guess is no. They'll just play with what they have. But again, it goes back to what I've said. You're going to see teams lose games this year because they play with shorthanded. Now, we've also seen some win in spite of being shorthanded. So it's just an interesting season from that standpoint.
All right. Next question. Blood Red Hog says the athletic department just asked for a $19 million loan. Do you think the U of A athletics can survive COVID? Will any sports have to be cut if temporary? And I know you want to kind of explain exactly what he means there.
Yeah, I think that's a little overly dramatic. Will it eliminate athletics? No. Athletics will survive COVID anywhere, certainly here, but I don't think there's anywhere. Maybe at some of these smaller schools, you might see some casualties there. But I think basically this loan that they got, it's to cover the shortfall from the lack of football ticket revenue for the coming year. Now, what did Hunter Yurachek did? How did he handle this for the budget? He cut back salaries, but they didn't fire anybody or furlough anybody. And they haven't cut back any sports. So they're not going to cut out sports or eliminate scholarships. And if everything works the way it's supposed to, if you get a vaccine, if things start going back to normal by January and you get your live gate back up, let's say Bud Walton Arena is full because Musselman's going to have a really good team. There's going to be a lot of interest. Razorback baseball might win a national championship next year. They're loaded. So you'd have good revenue from baseball. And then you get back into next fall, if the football team does really well, you might see Reynolds Razorback Stadium virtually full. So if they get all of that revenue coming in, they'll be able to pay off this. They're getting this loan, this $19 million loan or whatever it is, at a time when interest rates are about 3%. So you could pay it off fairly easily and quickly if all of those things fall into place. But here's what some people are saying. It's never going to be the same. And I can't argue against it right now because I haven't seen it. But some people believe that post-COVID, when we get back to normal, you're not going to have the crowds that you had. That some people are just going to go, you know what, I got used to not going to games. I'm just not going. I might watch on TV. And so revenues would be down permanently. And I'm not going to sit here and say that couldn't happen. It might.
It might happen. And that's hard to believe because that's an argument that we've been playing with since games started being fully televised every
That's
weekend.
right. But I'm not going to say it can't happen.
Right.
If it does happen, this is the other part that some people have been predicting for at least 10 years. I've been reading this, that these runaway salaries, a $10 million coach, a coach making $10 million a year, these ridiculous buyouts. I got a $15 million buyout. That all of that, building new facilities every time you turn around. Who's done that more than Arkansas? They've built so much stuff, and that's part of their debt right now. So what a lot of these people are saying is, I hope your facilities are really up to date now, because you may not be able to improve them again for the next 40 years. Now, we'll see if all of that turns out to be true. But some people believe the revenue from college athletics and the interest peaked somewhere a couple of years ago, and this COVID thing will kind of help knock it down some. And I don't know whether they're right or wrong.
I bet Hunter Yurachek's probably regretting letting Chad Morris redo the locker room, huh?
Yeah, well,
maybe completely redo that
sure.
Fred W. Smith Center inside there too, because there was a lot of
they
construction going on there for no
They spent a lot of money on those lockers who were essential.
A lot of those lockers.
And they were
a
new.
2-10 team.
They were like a few years old, and they just replaced them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, whatever. I think they were a year old, actually.
Yeah, and
this is the north end zone, and they got new ones. Okay. Anyways, that's a topic for another day. River Belly Hog asks, any word on how Bumper Poole is doing? I have not seen him on any of the practice videos, and the coaches haven't mentioned him in their recent interviews. I hope he is okay.
You know, we've been told that he's okay. About specifically, I mean, we just don't know. The only thing we know is that Sam Pitman had, after Thursday's nighttime workout in the stadium, which sort of took the place of the third scrimmage. It wasn't technically a scrimmage, but he talked a lot about all the position groups. And he talked a lot about how the linebackers had improved, and he mentioned a bunch of linebackers that weren't perceived to be guys that were starters or backups. And he didn't mention Grant Morgan or Bumper Poole. He didn't mention either one of them. So somebody, I think it was Tom Murphy, but somebody finally said, well, what about those two guys? And all Sam Pittman would say is, they're doing fine. Yeah. So that's all we know. According to the head coach, they're doing fine, even though he's not talking about them. So whatever.
We don't know.
We don't know.
We can't speculate. Absolutely. All right. I am Hog Holio.
Holio, yeah.
I am Hog Holio. Wants to know, how does a Pitman practice compare to a Petrino practice in regards to intensity and organization?
They're different. Bobby Petrino's practices were all about him and the offense. Pitman is a more typical head coach and more CEO type. It's about offense, defense, and he lets his coaches, his assistant coaches, do most of the coaching, whereas Petrino dominated everything. It was more about him. He would get mad at his defensive guys if they somehow messed up something the offense was doing. I always thought that was bizarre. You know, you're a team. You know, if your offense does something good, fine, great. You know, just tell the offense to do better next time. Petrino would go bonkers. He was always yelling at the defensive coordinator. Pittman is just more traditional. Petrino had certainly he had things that you could look at and say, wow, this guy's really smart. He knows how to call plays. He knows how to put an offense on the field. He was never a complete coach. His defenses were never what they should be. He wasn't a good recruiter. Pittman is a much better recruiter. And so if you're trying to make comparisons between these two guys, don't. Because there's so many things that Pittman won't do that this guy did. He's not going to get caught on a motorcycle running around with a volleyball player. That's not going to happen with him. He's not going to be yelling and screaming and cursing at his players all the time. He can be forceful when he wants to, but he's not like that. And he runs a good, well-organized practice, but it's more about attention to detail. Let your assistant coaches do their jobs. It's more traditional. Petrino was unlike anybody I've ever been around. He was about half nuts, but he did win games.
All right, Parallax Pig back and wants to know, what is the stated SEC? Oh, you moved that up on me. You did that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It had to move.
Okay, but you forgot to delete it. All right, Razor Boo, that's funny, wants to know, do you believe that the men's basketball team will play a full season? Who will be the emotional leader of the team, and which freshman will make the greatest impact?
Yeah, they will play a whole season. That's my opinion. I think they'll have a normal they may move the start. You may lose some games in November, early November, but I think they're going to have a pretty normal season. I'd say Desi Sills, from what it sounds like, will kind of be the emotional leader of the team. He's a junior, been around with the program now for 3 years. And then, I don't know, it's hard to say. Moses Moody is probably the guy everybody talks about the most to be that freshman that dominates. He certainly, you see him in all the videos that Musselman puts out, but
Yeah.
Those would be the two guys I would mention.
Yeah, going back to Desi Sills, I don't know if you saw that video that Arkansas basketball posted, but Eric Musselman asked all of their guys to write a letter to someone who used to wear their letter or their number. And Desi Sills wears number 3. Khalil Garland wore number 3, but he never got to play. And if you don't know Khalil Garland's story, he could never pass a heart test.
Right.
And it was really cool. Desi Sills wrote Khalil Garland a letter and said, "I'm dedicating my season to you for letting me wear number 3." It was really cool. That's on Twitter if you want to go check it out. Yeah, an emotional leader. He had me on like all the feels.
Emotional leader.
All the feels today, this morning. Okay. Whitewater says, "We understand the media has limited access to practice. Having said that, I was curious of your opinion of team speed. We always seem to be a step slow at linebacker and secondary."
Well, it's interesting because early on, maybe within the first week or so, when Sam Pitman was being interviewed after he'd been hired, he mentioned, we got to get faster in the secondary. Mm-hmm. Now, you don't do that immediately. Yeah. I know that. Now, look, they will deal with what they've got. And there are things you can do from a preparation standpoint to overcome some of that lack of speed. But he's right. Mm-hmm. There is a lack of speed at linebacker and in the secondary. They're going to have to recruit their way out of it. And those two things right there give me a little bit concerned because, yes, I think these guys will be better coached, but I think one of the reasons there were all those gouge plays from a year ago was because of a lack of speed. Somebody gets an angle on you and they're just gone.
And this is something we've been talking about now, I think, 3 years. Chad Morris came in and talked about speed, and he wasn't wrong there. He was wrong in a lot of things, but he wasn't wrong about speed. And Pittman's saying the same thing. So they've been trying to recruit speed in the secondary, but it's going to take some recruiting cycles.
It doesn't happen instantly, that's for sure.
All right. 10 Years of Hell asks, what are your thoughts as to why some athletes can play right away after transferring and some have to sit out a year?
Okay, let's go back to the original transfer rule, which was in place for decades. And that was anybody can transfer. Yeah. But you're going to have to sit out a year. There weren't any real exceptions. And what was the reasoning behind that? I think there was a fear on the part of the NCAA that if you didn't have some sort of sit-out rule, anybody that got to a school and decided they didn't like the coach or they didn't feel like they were getting enough playing time, they would just transfer. Mm-hmm. And so you'd just be having mass transfers all the time.
And you don't want your players to kind of become free agents at that point.
Yeah.
Jump from LSU to Alabama to all around the league. And
so they were very restrictive for a lot of years. And then there was a lot of pressure because there were some instances where people should have been allowed to transfer. They had legitimate reasons. And I think the transfer rule that was changed to reflect situations usually with family situations, like let's say your mother gets cancer and that wasn't the case when you signed with a school halfway across the country, but now she's got it and you want to go back and be at that school right next to where your mom lives so you can be around her as much as possible. They wouldn't punish you for that. And there are other situations where they would allow you to kind of not sit out. So why do we have these situations where some schools seem to get a guy and you say there's no way he's going to have to sit out, and then he doesn't, and then other schools seem like a guy has a legitimate reason.
I think Connor Vanover is he came home for medical reasons,
So, and then he's not allowed.
Right.
Here's what I think's going on. This is just my theory, but I think I'm right on this. I think the school where you're transferring away from, that coach still has a lot to do with what happens to you after you leave. I believe that if I'm at a school and I decide to leave and that coach is mad at me for leaving, he's put a lot of effort into me and he just feels like he's, you, the athlete, didn't make any attempt to understand my system. You didn't meet me halfway. Now you're wanting to leave me high and dry. I'm going to go to the NCAA and say, hey, he's not transferring for this reason. This is why he's transferring. And I think they're a lot more likely to listen to the coach in that situation. You may not hear about it, but that doesn't mean there weren't discussions behind the scenes. And the NCAA is influenced by that, and they say, you know what, you're going to have to sit out. On the other hand, what if a coach is perfectly okay with a guy transferring? You've got a lot of guys, you're a new coach, you got a lot of guys that are fitting into your system. This kid over here, Reggie Chaney.
I think Eric Musselman and Reggie Chaney is a perfect
example. He's very talented, but he maybe just didn't fit into your plans.
You want him to be successful.
Then you don't want him to be held back and stay at your school and not play when he could play somewhere else and be better. So you say, sure, I'm fine with it. And you might even take the extra step and call the NCAA and say, this is a good kid. He's transferring for a good reason. We don't care. Let him play immediately. Right. And so that's why you get these situations that don't seem to make any sense, because they're not admitting this publicly. It's just happening behind the scenes.
I think school cooperation is a huge part of it. Absolutely, Mike. All right, Delta Boy wants to know, how about the O-line?
Nice, quick question. I like those.
Short and to the point.
So far, it's been really good. They had that one hiccup, which was the second scrimmage. But let's go back to the first scrimmage. They really dominated. I mean, it was almost surprising. And you had all these touchdown passes, and Rakeem Boyd had these runs, and everything looked good. And then all of a sudden, they kind of, according to Sam Pitman, they kind of rested on their laurels and let people. What did Nick Saban call it? Rat poison. When you start getting complimented too much, then they let down a little bit. So they had the bad second scrimmage. This past week, they bounced back, looked good again. There's several things different about the offensive line, starting with the coach they've got. Because when Sam Pittman got hired, he went out and got Coach Carter. Coach Brad Davis. He went out and got him because he said he was one of the best offensive line coaches in the country. Now, if you're a head coach and your reputation was being one of the best in the country, wouldn't you think you're going to hire one of the best? So he hired a good one. The players love this guy, and they love the fact that their head coach they've got kind of two offensive line coaches, and they're working together. And what we're being told is that they're not cutting these guys any slack. Every single day, it's like, you know, you didn't go until the whistle on that play. Go back and do it again. We're not letting you get away with that. We're not letting you slack off a little bit. And so there's some of that going on. I also think there's some anger on the part of some of these guys because they got blamed for a lot of stuff last year that wasn't always their fault, and they're out to prove it. And they're going to get tested. They're going to get tested big time against Georgia, because I know Georgia always puts good defenses on the field. Those guys can tackle. They're hard to block. So this is going to be a huge challenge, but I think the offensive line is much improved.
Yeah. All right. How did UTSA look this weekend? Jumpty wants to know.
Wow.
Specifically, oh, sorry, you only highlighted that much.
Look at that giant question.
Ooh, specifically, the offensive play calling and the style of, why would they want to know that? We'll be following closely the coaching career of Barry Lunney Jr., as he is obviously head coaching candidate in the future for the Hawks. Interesting.
Preferably.
Yeah, he says.
Preferably when Sam Pittman retires after a successful career.
And you bring back Barry Lunney Jr., huh?
Well, that's what he's hinting at. If Barry Lunney had a great... Look, the guy's going to have to become a head coach at some point before that has any chance of happening. So let's say Pittman coached here for 10 years and was successful, and then he retired. He gets to be 70, and he says, I'm out. You know, is Lunney in a position to come back at that point? I don't know. What we're now seeing is he's got to prove himself as an offensive coordinator, then become a head coach, and this was the first game. For the first 3 quarters of that game, and you saw more of it than I did, it was impressive. I mean, they had a high-octane offense. He was taking a lot of chances. They were going for it. And then what happened? They got a big lead, and they kind of throttled back, and then all of a sudden it's panic time, and let's burn out the clock, and that didn't work. And the only reason they didn't lose that game was because the Texas State kicker missed an extra point.
And they won in double overtime.
Yeah, it went into double overtime. Otherwise, it wouldn't have gone into overtime, and they would have won on that extra point. So they got lucky. Yeah. But there was a lot of what I saw with that offense to indicate they're going to be kind of high octane and they're going to look pretty good. I just hope they learn. And that might not have been Lunney. That could have been Jeff Traylor, the head coach, saying, hey, come on, dial back. We got this thing won. So we don't know part of that. But a win's a win, so he's off to a good start.
There you go. All right, Twinkie275 wants to know any word on the men or women's basketball, home or away, single ticket availability. I live in Georgia, but willing to pay season prices just to get a single ticket. Whoo, buddy.
Yeah, we're a long way.
I wish we had an answer for you.
I think we're still a month away from them announcing anything on basketball. I tend to be optimistic, even though basketball is indoors, and theoretically that's a bigger problem for COVID. I think there may be a vaccine by then. There also may just be declining COVID numbers by then. So you could get larger numbers. If you're dealing with 25% football, maybe you could get 40% basketball. But with the interest here in Musselman, I don't think you're going to see single game tickets unless something big happens, like COVID is just wiped out and anybody can go. Now, as far as on the road, I mean, I got no idea about teams close to Georgia and whether or not you would have any luck trying to get a single game ticket from them. I will say you might as well forget Georgia because they played Georgia last year in Athens, so Arkansas is not going to Georgia this year. And they went to Gainesville, so they're not going to play Florida there. So those two games are out. I would check when the schedules are released, and they're not out yet. I would check out South Carolina.
I was gonna say, depending on where in Georgia, that's not a far drive.
Yeah, South Carolina is a possibility because they didn't play South Carolina in the regular season, so maybe they will, and maybe it will be, at Columbia. And
maybe
then
Tennessee.
Tennessee, but the real thing I would check out would be Auburn because we know they're going to play Auburn at Auburn at some point. So that would be. You would need to call them up and say, hey, what are the chances of getting a single game ticket?
Yeah.
And that's all I can advise you on.
Yep. All right. Make sure I'm on the right page here. All right. Pig's Feet says, a buddy and I tried to go to high school basketball games involving Arkansas recruits and prospective recruits. Do you think the limited seating due to COVID will make it hard for us to find tickets or seating?
It's sort of the same thing we talked about earlier with men's basketball. I think the situation is going to be better at some point, but I don't know if it would be in the fall. We might have to get into conference play. But you know what this really boils down to is the local COVID numbers, wherever that gymnasium is that you want to go to a game and watch it, what's the COVID numbers in that area? Because that's what determines how many people the school is going to let in, and maybe with their own school, the numbers of their students.
Right.
So you're going to have to check week to week. Just call them up and say, hey, you got any, I'd like to come to that game. What are my chances? I would think most high school basketball teams in this state don't sell their games out. So I would say your chances of getting a ticket are good. But again, it's going to be COVID related.
Yeah. And again, you're inside, which has its own
it could come with some other problems.
Yeah. The Bionic Pig says the NFL just proved that crowd attendance isn't a necessity, and the game alone itself can be very, very entertaining. Do you believe that collegiate ADs could adopt this as a last resort if need be?
Yeah, they could do that, but I think they're headed in the other direction.
They want revenue.
I think what is more likely is as we get deeper into the football season, you could see them relax some of these rules a little bit. Could go from 25 to 30%. This all will depend state to state.
Sure.
What the numbers you're allowed to do by you. Most of these states have a COVID safety committee or whatever, and they're the ones that set these percentages. For instance, A&M's percentage is much higher than Arkansas's, and they got a bigger stadium, so they're going to have more people. But as we get into November, you might see that go back up some. And then also if you get a vaccine and people take it fast enough, maybe it would affect football even more.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too with the NFL, you don't have any college teams who play indoors. And so you got a lot of NFL teams that play indoors. For example, when I was reading about the Detroit Lions, because we have two former Hogs on the Detroit Lions, Trey Flowers talking about no fans. They're not going to have fans for the first two home games, and then they're going to reassess. So I think you're right, where they're going to just try to see. But again, you're inside.
Well,
the flip side of all of that, Jerry Jones has already said the Cowboys are going to have fans in the stands because they have a excellent filtration system.
Yeah, and look, we heard earlier in the summer we were hearing, well, college football is going to look and see what happens with the NFL before they make a lot of decisions. This is a case where the NFL, I think, is looking at college. I think right now they're looking at these games where fans, especially starting in 2 weeks, when you get 30,000 people at College Station, a reasonably sized crowd. I think they want to look and see, how did that work? Did you have an outbreak after that was over? Can it be traced to the game? And if not, yeah, we'll open up more too. Everybody's trying to kind of copy everybody. Whoever does it first, it's like we'll watch and see what happens with them.
Exactly. This is something you kind of don't want to be the first person to
but somebody's got to be the first.
Exactly. All right. Hotlanta Hog wants to know any overall impressions of the start of college football with the ACC and Big 12 games over the weekend. What'd you think?
Yeah, again, I've already mentioned it. I like the fact that there were some teams with quarantine players that went ahead and decided to play. I like that because it shows creativity and determination. This country was built on solving problems. These people were solving problems. And don't come back with me that you're not being safe. Anybody that had it was not playing. So it's not a matter of not being safe. And anybody that played was tested and they didn't have it. So it's not that. It's this idea that you're going to figure out a way to play. So I like that. I think I said last week, Alyssa, that I think that COVID might affect the underdogs and make them play better, and affect the favored teams and make them, in some cases, kind of relax a little bit, just because you're used to success and this is kind of messing with everything and you don't like it and you just don't have a good attitude about it. We're seeing more and more. A&M lost a player that the guy decided to forego, and now he's going to the NFL. We're seeing that with a lot of these better teams. And yet what we're seeing with some of the other teams like Arkansas, is their players are fired up. They want to play. So I think we've already seen some upsets, and I think we're going to see more upsets. And I think when this whole season is over, one of the things we're going to walk away from this is that there were a lot of teams that got beat that wouldn't have gotten beat if we didn't have COVID.
Yeah. Okay. Hot Atlanta Pig, Blood Red Pig. Blood Red Hog is back with another question. Pitman isn't focusing on Georgia until game week. This seems like a departure from past UA coaches. Didn't most of them focus on their season opening opponent well before game week?
You know, I'm trying to go back and remember, but I think in most cases Arkansas has opened with a mid-major, you know, and not a game that you've got to just point to.
There was that one year where they opened with Auburn. What was that, like 2016 or something?
Yeah, right. So most of the time, it's been typical to start about 2 weeks early, and that's with a mid-major. Now, with Auburn, I think Bielema pretty much admitted he was kind of working on that game the whole preseason a little bit. So in answer to the question, I think it is a little bit unusual that Pitman is waiting until Friday. Now, he's not actually waiting till game week. He's going the first Georgia-type workout is Friday, according to him. Now, let me just say this. We don't know that that's true. He could just be saying that. I still remember one of the players about 2 weeks ago getting asked and said, yeah, we've already started doing work on Georgia. So somebody's got their wires crossed here. And if Pitman is actually having them work on it and he doesn't want to tell us, that's fine.
Yeah.
I don't have any issues with that.
Yeah.
But we do know for sure that he said that they're going to start on Friday. So they're going to have a Friday Georgia workout, a Saturday, then be off Sunday, then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So that's 6 workouts you've got where you're preparing for your season opener opponent, and that seems like enough.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. And again, it's the first game of the year. There's no game video to go back and watch. There's not a lot that you can go and study right now because all of the game video that you have on Georgia is from last year, and you have the benefit of your head coach coming from that team. So
and they lost virtually their entire offensive line. Their quarterback's not there.
Yeah.
We don't know about their other quarterback. If he's going to, they've got a USC transfer, and we still don't know if he's going to be cleared to play.
Yeah.
And then they got, I think, a Wake Forest guy or somewhere like that. So who knows?
We'll see. All right. Our last question comes from Prattville Pig, who asks, with the opener 2 weeks out, can you help the in-state viewers with tips on where to find block chili from Paul L's Cheese Dip?
Okay.
I remember this question because we had to Google.
I think block chili is actually brick chili. That's what I know it as. Brick chili is, you can buy it just about anywhere. Sam's Club.
I had no idea what
Sam's Club, Walmart. I've always seen it as a frozen brick. And you take it and you put it and you thaw it out and you put it in a pot and you just cook it. It's real simple. Now this Paul Eel's cheese dip, that's the thing I don't know anything about. And if anybody knows if that's actually a thing, tell us about it.
I want the recipe.
We'll talk about it on our game day show.
We'll make a promise. If someone can tell us what Paul L's cheese dip is and give us the recipe, comment below with the recipe, we will make it and eat it and try it on our first game day show.
Yeah, our game day show.
Make
Paul Eel's cheese dip. Never heard of it, but it sounds good.
All right, there you go. All right, I hope someone does because I'm very curious with this block chili. We'll see how that goes. Very interesting. All right, that's another week of Ask Mike. If you've got a question for Mike, just remember, head over to Hogville, click on the forums in the Ask Mike forum and ask away. All right, that's going to do it. For Mike Irwin, I'm Melissa Orange, and we'll see you next week.